But that's cool. I mean, that's where I think genuine inspiration and creativity comes from is you've got a lot of options to choose from, and there are options that you've generated, and enjoy that process. Hi, I am DemonDev. Lately, I've been trying to be a bit more thinking about mental, so I'm gonna go ahead and give this a shot. It's gonna be a morning dev mental, kind of like a meditation, but probably not so organized as that. Basically, just kind of saying out loud some of the thoughts that I'll have at the start of like trying to get to work on some game dev stuff, and how I uh, push back against all the things that make it hard to both get started and get good work done. So I'm sitting down. I'm thinking about, all right, what is the plan? I say that a lot at the beginning of a journal because there's a frustration I have with like, where do you even start with the thoughts? So I try to do that. I say, well, okay, what's the plan? Well, I'm trying to make progress on the core of the game. I've developed some tools and some things that will help me add in content to the game. But what I really need to work on is some of the core systems that are bringing that into play when the player is moving around. So, what's the best way to do that? Well, sometimes I'll think about just chronologically. If I'm ever in a place of getting frozen down on how things should work, or what work I should be doing, even if I planned out, all right, I need to add movement, I need to add explosions, or like casting today. Even if I know that's what I'm doing, I'll do some thinking about like, okay, but there's so many elements to choose from within that. Like, should I work on the mana system? Should I work on the effects? Should I work on the physics? Or should I think about the trigger hit logic? Should the logic be on the missile, or should the enemy receive the missile? Should there be a kind of like a generic, get hit box that I attach to some sort of trigger collider on the enemy? Like, okay, that sounds good. Maybe I'll do that. But with that kind of tumbling through all the different things that are going on, what do you pick? A lot of times I find myself falling back to like a chronological things like, okay, if I press the play button, what do I want to happen next can be a really good way to focus and just quick prioritize. All right, well, nothing happens when I click, and clicking should fire off a spell. So I guess what I'm going to do is jump straight into making some sort of a script that will instantiate a cube that will move. All right, it's a much clearer path forward. And typically, once you're in it, the priorities, at least for me, reassemble somewhat. So you never have a clear view of the field when you're in the weeds with programming or art creation, or just moving stuff around in the scene view. If you're using Unity, for example, you never really have a clear view of everything. But you do start to get a feeling like, oh, this is making a big impact, or oh, maybe this is a more subtle impact. Doesn't mean it's not worth it, but you should you listen to those cues just from the energy aspect. One thing I say a lot to myself and to other people is you should follow the energy. The single most important variable is doing things, but before you do things, you tend to want to feel good or have some sort of a hopeful prediction that you will feel good doing it, or seeing the results of what you're doing. So I think you should chase that feeling. You should chase that high to a certain extent. When you build up a bunch of victories, then you start to develop a kind of, not even exactly confidence, but rigorousness, or I don't know, persistence. Some people think about it as momentum, but I think of it slightly differently, as just kind of like a resistance or ability to take on damage, in a sense, like take on harder tasks or more challenging problems. Uh, it's pretty similar to momentum now that I think about it. But yeah, I mean, once you tackle problems, not just arbitrary any problems, but problems that are accessible in a hopefully low stress way. So an accessible problem typically is one that you don't have to do too much thinking about the design of. So chronologically, a lot of the times the first, and when I say chronologically, I mean just press the play button on your game. You know, you're trying to play your game as the player, get in that space and be like, oh, what do I want to happen next? A lot of times it's like a UI pop up, or it could even be a tutorial tip. That's not necessarily the most advisable because your game could change so much that the tutorial tips aren't the best to work on. But if you're in a state of paralysis, I think it's a very powerful idea to accept wastefulness as efficiency. Now, and then that sounds kind of ridiculous and definitely is, either an idiom or some sort of paradoxical logic, but a lot of times you can save time by being wasteful, because the wastefulness is not the most expensive part of the equation. The most expensive part of the equation is energy, decision making, paralysis, having a good time. If you're killing it, like if you're just doing lots of work, patterns will emerge over time. You're getting better, and you will see the way that things should work. I know that a lot of my friends who are programmers, or people I know, and myself included, the longer you work on your programming skills and on your game project, the more of an expectation you build on yourself automatically that you're going to get it right on the first or second try, or sooner or harder, and the code will look better and run more optimally. But I want to challenge that progression. I think that, at least I see in myself and in many other people, the biggest enemy facing is not coding skills or design sense. It's the paralysis to just kind of go with something. I think that a lot of programmers suffer from anxiety about, going down a path, and maybe they start down a path and then just kind of freeze up because they're like, oh, I'm getting that feeling. I'm recognizing some subtle, maybe subconscious patterns, maybe very conscious patterns, that this isn't going to be the way that it works in the end. I want to skip to that. I want to get to the design that will, live in the game all the way to the end. Like, oh, wouldn't that be cool to have like some of these core systems, the way the inventory works or the way attacks work? Like, I want to make it the right way. And that's a beautiful dream. The problem is, most of the time, no matter how good you are, a better version of both how you're coding it and how the mechanics are designed from a player standpoint, the best version of that kind of hits later. It comes for you later, because, what is the crowd opinion on games that are developed at an extremely high skill level with sometimes hundreds of team members, or even at an indie level, maybe only a couple members, but some seriously smart people doing some really genius stuff. How come how come gamers, uh, non-game developers that are playing games, how can they have a insightful critical opinion on games when they don't know anything? Like, you sitting as a programmer, things, and you're probably a gamer too. How come gamers can criticize? Well, they have one extremely powerful leg up. When they're criticizing the games, they're criticizing fully reformed, hopefully, released games, like products. Like, what's the best way to design something? Well, look at another version of that design and experience it, play it, and then come away with strong feelings and reactions and insights that no developer gets to have ahead of time. The closest you can get to that is iteration. You just make something and then you can react to it. And sometimes that reaction's worse than the real thing. That's something that people who are playing games are not privy to. They'll see some interaction. They'll be like, wow, this is like messed up or not working or terrible to experience. It should be this other way. Now they have in a sense, the courtesy of not being able to experience that game right away. So it's a good chance. There's a good chance that would be a positive change, whatever they're inspired by, whatever they have strong feelings about, playing your game or playing any game. But there's no real way to test that unless they're a developer themselves, or the developers, see that opinion and implement that. So that's, a burden you have to carry is, when you make something, most likely the past version of you is not the true mastermind. There's certainly a lot that should be respected about starting places, and like your first idea is often one of your best ideas. So there's a good chance that you will make your first version of a mechanic. Say it's like the way that an inventory, like, attaches items to slots, and you can reorganize the inventory, fun stuff like that. Um, there's a good chance that the first way you implement it, maybe the code is worse, but the second time, maybe you decide you want to redo it because you don't like the way that it works, or you have some design ideas that it would be too difficult to implement with like a straight rework of like the existing code. So you do a total reboot of it, and it's worse. That happens a lot. So I know I was just talking for a really long time about how powerful it is to be able to react to some sort of a version or a product, and then, carry those insights and influences. I'm now I'm immediately pushing back against it and saying, okay, well, a lot of times, your next version of something, you're distracted, and not necessarily caring about the most important variables or principles like you might have at the beginning design. So it's possible your second version will be worse. Maybe even your third version, if you're pretty hardcore about it, and like really trying to get it right, will be worse. But I think, when you start to get to the third or fourth iteration, you're probably starting to develop a new pattern recognition. So you may have not been able to design the second or third iteration in a way that was overall better, but there were some elements that you did better, both in the code and the design. I'll be pretty sure at that point, and you can bring them all back. That's certainly something that happened with Electra. I went super weird. Some of my initial ideas were great, where you have a piece of the text box break off, and that is a representation of the expression choices, the dialogue choices in the game, one aspect of it. And then it reforms, and that's very visceral. It feels really cool. But I was frustrated with a lot of the limitations of that. It was a very slow animation, and my game is built upon hundreds, thousands of dialogue choices across the game. So I was like, oh, I really can't have an animation that's taking 2 or 3 seconds to switch between one or two options. And there could be 3 or 4 or even like 10 different dialogue options for one step of a conversation. Most conversations are like 50 choices. Now, most of them are pretty light choices. What I'm hoping will reduce the overwhelming choice making in Double Demons using the Electra system is that you have much more nuanced choices. So instead of every single step in a conversation deciding whether someone's your ally or your enemy, most steps in the conversation will be, poking fun at something in a, maybe a little bit more mean way or more nice way, or, commenting in a more joking way about something that's gone on, or, more serious. You have more nuanced choices like that. So I hope that there will be a flow. Anyways, getting distracted. So we're trying to recover the morning dev mental. And the most important thing is energy. What can you enjoy or predict, hopefully, that you will enjoy doing? Now, if you have a stronger mental than that when you start out the day, if you're like, wow, I've been killing it lately. I just want to make this game, move. I want to do what's most valuable to the game right now. Then maybe you can move. Again, chronological is a great design paradigm for deciding what to do today. And there's an infinite number of things to do, but chronologically, it'll way constrain that. Like, oh, it would be nice if there was a UI pop up here, or it would be nice if this missile went faster, or, enemy died here, or I could win this, and then the next thing would happen. Chronological is a great way to focus and be like, get to work. But if you're feeling like you want to activate your galaxy brain and, do right by your project, and you're like, I'm willing to take on a challenge today to push things forward in what seems like the best way, then you can you can zoom out a bit and play the game, not looking for the next chronological next step, but play the game and try to, if there's any playable version of your game, if you're a little bit far along, and try to feel like, oh, what do I like about this? What do I not like about this? And really try to chase your feelings and then bring that into some sort of powerful next step. If you don't have anything that you can play, maybe try to get in touch with what's inspiring you about this project or what could inspire you about this project. I think, and it makes me sad to say this, the longer that I work on games or just creative projects in general, the more it feels like the core of design is idea curation. Um, I think that at least this is the way my mind works, is I just have lots of ideas and most of them are very garbagey and infectiously garbagey, not just like, haha, that's a dumb joke idea. I should say this and everyone will go haha. I'm talking about like ideas that are like, oh, what if every single AI character was operating off of the same core conversation basis that branched based on the AI's personality? That could save so much content time, so much writing time. Oh, maybe I'll do something like that. An idea like that is complicated and infectious because there's a lot of appealing aspects, and it might be the right idea for some games. It really depends on what you're going for. I specifically am not doing that. And that's why I put it as an example. It's a dangerous, infectious idea. But at the core of good design, I think it's not just like coming up with principles and constraining everything to them. That's definitely a way to help process your ideas. Get them through maybe one or two of the first stages of all the ideas, all the cool things you could do, and is this going to be actually fun in some way, and then additionally, does it fit into the game? Does it work with everything else that is good about the game? Um, but a lot of that is just constantly saying yes or no, or rejecting or accepting different ideas as they come to you. So you have probably lots of ideas per day. I strongly encourage people to write down ideas because you really don't know until you start writing down ideas, and then maybe I very rarely read over my journalings. I think there's a process that happens that's very healing and positive just by doing it. But when I do look over, sometimes crazy numbers of like maybe like 100 journal entries, and I'll be like, wow, like I totally forgot about all those ideas. Now, a lot of times I'm also like, I really love that idea in the moment. I hate that idea now. I see now a larger context. It's fun to come up with ideas. I'm being very uh, erratic, but I just have so many ideas that I'm trying to process and curate for you guys. Um, it's really fun to have ideas, and you should always love that about yourself. That's probably why you're here to some extent. And even if those ideas are just like influences or insights from other games that you wish were slightly different or could be applied in other games that had missed out on potential, you should definitely love about yourself the idea formation process where things will come to you, or you'll come up with things by combining different thoughts or influences, and then you have this. Sometimes you just need to appreciate how cool a bad idea is. Sometimes you can think, wow, this is not going to work, but I feel pretty clever coming up with it. And you should encourage that process. And I think that design, at least this is how it feels to me, design works best as thinking of yourself like floating through some sort of idea. You're dumpster diving in your ideas, and there's just so many ideas all around you. People generally know execution is the way to make something great, but you still have to choose what to execute on, and you're floating through this nether of thousands of ideas. Most of them are terrible, but that's cool. I mean, that's where I think genuine inspiration and creativity comes from, is you've got a lot of options to choose from, and there are options that you've generated, and enjoy that process. I think that's the core of design, and thinking big brain mode about your project is picking and choosing your little collection of ideas. People make suggestions. Sometimes their suggestions, again, very powerful, infectious ideas that could be good or bad, that could transform your project. Be open to it, but also maybe recognize that because of all the factors, people might be really clever with their ideas, but their value may not be anything to your project, but they might be very cool ideas themselves. So something that you can kind of pass on to other people who are interacting with your project or making their own. It's just being like, wow, that's a cool idea. I hate, you don't have to say hate, but I hate the way that it would affect my game. But that's wow, that's it. Really inspired. That's really interesting. Just try to love that process because I think that'll be really good for everyone. All right, have a good one. See ya.